Hey, everybody, this is G Marks, and thank you very much for joining me for another episode of BizBooks, where we talk to great and smart authors of business books so they can explain to me and to you what they're trying to get across in the books that they have written. And today, my special guest is Camille Fournier. Camille, I even forgot to ask you, even when we were talking before, it's Fournier, right? Am I pronouncing it?
Fournier, actually.
Okay.
That's the A is the only French part we've retained, but Fournier, yes.
Yeah. I really should. I took French in high school. I should know that by now.
All right. No problem.
Camille's book is called The Manager's Path, a guide for tech leaders navigating growth and change. Camille's website is camilletalk.com. And Camille, before we dive into the book, let me just ask you to share a little bit about yourself and how you came to writing this book 57 years ago, or actually not that long ago, but tell us how you came to writing the book.
Sure. So I wrote the book because I was the CTO of a startup called Rent the Runway.
Yep.
And, you know, I had worked at big companies before my time at the startup, and done a little bit of management and certainly experienced, lots of managers at these big companies. And then I went to this startup and ended up going through a very rapid growth of becoming a manager and a manager of managers and an executive and running and growing a reasonably sized engineering team.
Right.
And, at the time that I was going through that, there wasn't a lot of writing out there on engineering management specifically. There was some, not nothing, right. But there wasn't a lot of material that I felt really spoke to not just like engineering management as an abstract concept, but the challenges that engineering managers face throughout these different phases of their career. And so, when I left that job in 2015, late 2015, I decided that it would be a good idea to write down all the things that I had learned. I had been blogging some before that. So I had something of an audience already. And I just felt like I had learned so much so quickly about all these different phases and, leading people through these different phases of management growth that, it would be a good time for me to just get all these thoughts out of my head and onto paper and provide something that would help people really through different stages of their management career as engineers.
So yeah, I'm really glad that you're not skirting the obvious, which is this book is really it's niche in the sense that it's specifically for engineers, and when you talk about engineers, I'm assuming you mean software engineers, correct? Like developers. Like my son's a mechanical engineer, but so that would or would not.
But I have to say the surprising thing about this book is I've had a reasonable number of people that are not software engineers, including like lawyers,
right,
say, I read your book and I thought it was great.
Right.
And that is a little surprising to me because, to be honest, I agree with you that it was very much written, I know software engineering. That is what I do. Yep. I don't know law. I'm definitely not a lawyer.
Right.
But I do think that, beyond the software engineering audience, I think for people who are leading others who do very sort of detailed knowledge work, I think there is an element of it that can be useful for that. But it is very much, I very much wrote it for software engineers. I am confident it will be relevant for people in that career path. I can say less confidently that it will be relevant for others outside of that.
No, it does have relevance for people that are outside of the career path. But, honestly, when you think about the huge audience of software engineers there are and developers around the world, it's absolutely, an audience that's in need of this kind of book. And let's also remember that, as because you manage these people, they're technical people, I mean, some of these people don't know how to use verbs, but they're good at their jobs. And yet to get a project done successfully, you need to have a good level of management skills. And this is, I think this book will definitely be a help. Okay. Let's dive into a little bit. You have a whole chapter on mentoring. Tell us, what is an Alpha Geek?
So an Alpha Geek is that really smart engineer who is extremely talented, very, very technically sharp, that just over focuses on that sort of their technical correctness and skill as a way of kind of establishing dominance over everyone else. And they are a person who can often create a bad culture for those around them because they're so, they act in such a dominant manner that they make it scary for people to make mistakes or ask questions about technical things because, oh my gosh, you don't know that obvious thing that of course I know because I'm the smartest person on this team. And they tend to be, I have been this Alpha Geek actually. So, I write this from a place of personal experience that, I think it's not that uncommon for some people to go through this phase where they're kind of a senior engineer. They're probably a newish senior engineer. They're probably not somebody with 20 plus years of experience, although I'm sure there are some of those out there. Sure. But, someone who is really smart, but maybe actually a little bit insecure about sharing sharing with others the opportunity to do great things, right? They're not, they have to be the smartest person in the room. Right. And, I wrote about this character partly because I've been this character. And I know that you can actually, one can grow out of that, right? It is possible to mature through that. But as a manager and a leader, if you have one of these folks on your team and you aren't sort of coaching them out of that, it can be really detrimental to other people on the team because it really does create kind of an unsafe, psychologically unsafe culture where others, just don't feel like they can speak up as much. They don't feel like they can have ideas or make mistakes. And that can be really bad for a team.
So why include, your whole description and story about an Alpha Geek in a chapter about mentoring?
That's actually, why did I put it in that chapter? Hold on, give me 1 second. Let me remind myself.
Sure. I have some thoughts as to why, because I the way I read the Alpha Geek is that person, that personality can actually be a very good mentor to younger people. And it's a way to get them to sort of jump off their high horse a little bit and empathize.
Yes, that's right. No, yes, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Yes, that's right. Now that I'm refreshing, like I said, It's been a while.
Yes.
You're right that I think mentoring. So sometimes an Alpha Geek, by asking them to mentor others, that can kind of help them develop a little bit of empathy for those who are early in their career. Sometimes it doesn't work out. So it is definitely a mixed bag of, sometimes that is a great thing. And sometimes you need to do a little bit more than making them a mentor. But yes, you're right. That was my, that was where I was going.
Yeah, that was. And I thought it was a really good point. So, okay. So before we leave mentoring, because there's a whole bunch of other, things that you cover in managing engineers, just your overall thoughts about the importance of mentoring an intern, mentoring a new hire. I mean, it's, how important is this?
I mean, I think it's super important. I think every engineer should try to do it, because even if you do not want to be a manager, we need you senior engineers who don't want to manage to still be teaching others how to be great engineers.
Right.
And, software engineering in the modern world, by and large, is a team sport, right? We do it in groups. We do it in groups that work together, and developing those relationships with others, helping, the next generation learn what you know. First, it's just really, frankly, it's good for your career, even if you do not want to ever be a manager. Those connections you make as a mentor, those people may go on to hire you someday. Agreed. Right? Or at least, introduce you to a new company, introduce you to a new opportunity. I think we remember our mentors, especially the ones that we learned a lot from. And, I have certainly, bent over backwards in my time to, do what I could for people that I frankly have mentored in the past and that mentored me, because, I feel like you create such a good connection with someone when you have a good mentoring experience with them. And so I really do think it is beneficial to everyone, whether they want to be a manager or not, to have some comfort and experience mentoring others.
Perfect. That's perfect. All right, Camille. So let's keep moving on. What is a tech lead? And you mentioned this one weird trick that tech leads tend to have. And if you can remember, let's see what that is.
You have read my book more recently than I have.
I did.
So,
I did.
Oh yes, okay. I do remember that. Okay, so first of all, like in my mind, a tech lead is not the most technical person on the team. So sometimes it is, but I think the one of the important distinctions that I try to make in this book, and that I think is worth reiterating, is that the tech lead job is a leadership job for a group of engineers working together. But that doesn't mean that is the decider on all technical matters. Leadership of a group of engineers working together means a lot of things. It means, are we working on the right things together? Are we coordinating our work effectively? A lot of project management skills, frankly, are fairly important for a tech lead to start to develop. And those are, again, very useful skills, whether you want to be a manager or not. Knowing how to effectively lead a multi-person project, I just think is an incredibly useful skill for any engineer, manager, or individual contributor to develop. And I think, tech leads need to have pretty good communication skills, right? They need to be able to balance thinking about the technical side of the work, writing code, designing things, with the slightly less hands-on, but still extremely important work of making sure the team is working well together, communicating what's going on with the team, to others outside of the team, etc.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's funny, the tech leads on any project you had mentioned, the ones that I've worked with in the past on development teams at different clients that I work with are, it's funny that you say they are not the most technical people that are there. They tend to have a little bit more management skills, more project management skills than actually technical skills, correct?
I mean, I definitely think it's a mix, but I think, I do think that what you find is that there's a depth versus breadth thing that we all have, right? So, I think people like me who are senior managers, we tend to be fairly broad. Right. I actually happen to be broad in a deep area, which is I'm very much in a platform engineering function, which is my passion is sort of back in distributed systems. So I know a lot about that, but I'm very broad, in that. Okay. And I think that, you see individual contributor engineers, some of them want to be very, very deep, right? They just want to know every detail all the way down of the thing that they are working on, or, some area. They want to be like the deepest compiler expert in the world, right? They want to be the deepest front-end framework expert in the world, whatever, right? And I think I think for folks like that who they want to be extremely focused on a technical problem or a set of technical problems, they're probably not your best tech lead, because as a tech lead, you have to be able to pull out of that focus and have just a little bit of breadth, again, the breadth of what's going on for multiple people in your area. But so I think you can be a very good engineer and be a tech lead, but you don't have to be the depth expert. In fact, I think often the depth expert is maybe not the right person to be a tech lead on a team, because that person's really going to want to be spending their time just 100% in those details.
Makes sense. That makes sense. So listen, I mean, you're managing a team of people that have all sorts of different personalities, and you can have interns and new hires. We talked about the Alpha Geek before. We talked about tech lead, the pros, the cons, but there are other personality types that are part of this team. So let me throw out a few of these personality types that you mentioned in your book, and I just want to get your thoughts on them, okay? Because we all deal with these people. You talked about a conflict avoider versus a conflict tamer, Give me your thoughts on those two types of personalities and how they impact you when you're managing them.
Yeah, I mean, conflict avoiders, and you see this both in employees, and you see it in managers, frankly, which is a little bit worse.
Right.
Are those folks who just, they do not, they want to make people happy. They
Right.
really are afraid of disappointing people, or, really having any kind of conflict in front of them just makes them very uncomfortable. And this is a very common thing, right? You had a bad, experience growing up with people, fighting, and you just want to make everybody happy, or, you're just, whatever, this is just your personality. It's fine. Lots of people, kind of naturally tend this way. And that's okay, because certainly, like, the opposite side, which is people who seek out conflict, which is my natural personal tendency, is equally bad, right? So you don't want to be, you don't want to be a person who seeks out conflict any more than you want to be a person who always avoids conflict.
Right.
But I think that it is important as a leader, certainly, to realize that conflict is going to happen, and avoiding conflict often just allows it to fester and cause problems for everyone.
Sure.
And it's very frustrating as an engineer when your manager, when you are having a disagreement with someone else on your team, for example, and you can't resolve it between the two of you. And it's great when your team can resolve their own conflicts, right? I do think managers are probably wise to try to encourage some self-resolution where possible, but that's not always possible. Sometimes someone is just being a bully to someone else, and you as the manager have to step in, right? Sometimes two people just do not work well together, and you have to either coach them through to help them work better together, or figure out how to move them so that they don't have to work together, frankly, but you can't just leave these conflicts unaddressed. When there's a conflict between what your team wants to do and what another team wants to do, I think the worst is when you see a manager who just says yes to everything, right? They don't want to say no to someone asking them to do something, right? Whether it's their boss or somebody else on another team, somebody important. So they just say yes, yes, yes. And the team is like, but we can't do it. We can't get it done. We don't have the bandwidth. What do you want us to do?
But is this a matter? I mean, like, you can't really fix those people, right? I mean, people that are like conflict avoiders, or people that actually look for conflict. And I'm kind of like you, Camille. I also look for conflict. That's like sort of like, I don't think that's going to change within a person. So is it more important as a manager just to be able to recognize the people that are the avoiders of conflict versus the people that seek it out, and keep that in mind as you're managing them? Or are you actually saying,
so I do
change them?
No,
You know what I mean?
I mean, look, I absolutely agree with you that, like, a good manager is certainly going to recognize it and know what they're working with.
Right.
Now, I do think that there are people out there who just don't even realize that about themselves.
Right.
And when it is brought to their attention, and especially if it's brought to their attention in a way that helps them see that it is having a negative impact on their team, on their career, they will do something about it. I mean, so like I said, like, I am, my personality is such that I don't mind conflict. Maybe
Right.
I even seek it out, and sometimes. But I was given very clear feedback at some point in my time, actually, in the CTO role, that I was creating a bit of a culture of fear on my own team, because I was being a little bit too much of an alpha geek. I was being a little bit, I was being a little bit too much of a conflict seeker with my peers. And, and I was just creating a place where people didn't feel safe. And I took that feedback extremely seriously, personally. I frankly, no one had said it to me that way ever. And when someone said it to me that way, I mean, it was very hard to hear, but it was probably one of the turning points of my career, because I was like, oh, that's happening. I'm doing that. I can work on that. And I did not fix it overnight, but I am significantly better about that than I was 5-6 years ago, because I've spent 5 or 6 years plus, more than that, working on it, to kind of just be aware of that tendency, and develop mechanisms for approaching things differently. And I do believe people can work on that. But I think you're also are correct that, like, a good manager also acknowledges that like you're working with who you're working with, right? You've
Yeah.
got,
Yeah.
you've got the team that you've got. And sometimes people are eager to change when they find these things out about themselves and they want to work on it. Sometimes people are just who they are, and you want to put them in roles where they're going to be successful.
But as you say in that same chapter, I mean, good managers don't turn a blind eye to stuff like that. And clearly some manager of yours brought, your personality into, so that you knew, do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, hey, Camille, this is something that you got to work on. So rather than like pretending it's not happening, even though they recognize it, you got to bring it to the attention of somebody working for you so they can look to improve themselves. And I guess if it's communicated in the right way, most people are open to taking, advice and, and doing a little bit better, So
I think so.
Which brings me to some of the other people that you mentioned in your chapter. So I want to get your thoughts on them as well. You talk about the brilliant jerk. And like the brilliant jerk almost seems like an alpha geek to me. But I was kind of curious because we all know the brilliant jerks that we have in our groups. I'm kind of curious. I mean, listen, this is like your expertise. How do you handle somebody like that?
Oh,
besides killing them.
I mean, this one is really hard because you really do, I have certainly seen managers refuse to deal with brilliant jerks, and their teams just suffer and suffer and suffer because they're like the alpha geek who never got that feedback in the right time. And even, sometimes actually, amusingly, the brilliant jerk sometimes will be a great mentor to certain types of people, but they still just create this kind of terrorist culture around them that is it's tough.
It is. Don't you find that when you sometimes I've come across people like that in my life? Sometimes it almost if you bring it right out and really and say like, listen, dude, you are brilliant, but you're also kind of a dickhead. So, we need to work on that. And a lot of times, if the timing is right and it's said in a certain way, I've also found like saying like, I mean, you are complimenting that person by saying like, we respect how smart that you are. But, obviously you got to work on certain other things. By doing that, that seems to be a decent way of approach just by bringing it out,
I actually agree. I think, and it's, it's funny to me though, that like, I think a lot of managers are terrified of losing their brilliant jerks and they just will not give them feedback because I think that one of the real challenges with the brilliant jerk is you get addicted to the things that they're good at.
Sure.
And they often become like a single point of failure. They're the only person that really knows how the system works. They're the only one who can do things X, Y, or Z way. And, and managers just use that as a crutch very often. I've seen this. This is a really very common repeated pattern that I've seen. And, my experience is that, frankly, if you let that go and don't deal with it, you're just going to have ongoing problems. The team is never going to really evolve to be a very healthy team. You're still going to limp along because look, you've got this great person that's probably like individually very strong in getting things done. But frankly, if they don't change, and if you're willing to actually deal with the situation, you give them the feedback, sometimes they will change. Sometimes they won't change. Sometimes you need to move them out. They need to go somewhere else. They need to work for someone they're going to listen to and actually get this feedback from, or your team is not the right team. But I will say pretty much every time I've seen a team have to go to the point where they moved out a brilliant jerk, the team has been so much healthier for that action after a couple of months. I mean, I think people really underestimate the damage that the brilliant jerk can do on a team.
Right. It's funny as we're talking about all this, it's like an episode of Silicon Valley, from HBO, like you're going through different types. So, okay. So along with that, you also talk about the non-communicator, right? So like, the genius person that's just, super technical, but like just cannot, express themselves, which to me almost describes every single person you would find on a development team. But that's just my flawed view of this. Tell me about the non-communicator. Like, who is that person? How do you deal with a person like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, you've got the person who like, they live in their own head. They just want to be like heads down, working on what they're working on. They view they view like giving status updates as almost like an insult, to their brilliance.
Yeah.
And I think, I'll be honest, I don't remember what I wrote in the book about this, but I've certainly worked with plenty of these people in the interim. And what I would say, the advice I would give now for non-communicators is like, I think one of the things that new-ish managers, new to sort of middle career managers, really, you've got to learn how to make the most lightweight process that still keeps you in the loop about what's going on in the team.
Right.
And I think sometimes people like make non-communicators dig their heels in more because they just create more and more process that they throw on those folks. And it's like, they already don't want to be interrupted. They don't really want to like tell you what they're working on, partly because like, they're worried that you're going to like,
criticize, give them more work,
give them more work, tell them to work on something else that they don't want to work on.
Right.
And so you kind of have to like build some trust up with those folks that you're not trying to like, like help them understand why you want them to do what you want them to do. Really be very lightweight as much as possible in the process that you ask them to go through.
Right.
Possibly like pair them with others, depending on the team that you have around you, so that maybe if you pair them with someone who's a little bit better at communicating, they will feel better in a sort of smaller interactions, and that better communicator can kind of help fill that gap.
Also, if you take that person out and get them pretty drunk, they tend to like open up and talk. That's usually as well.
That's it.
Then there's the last one before I move all this, only because these are fascinating personality types, is the person who doesn't give you any respect, and I mean, Camille, and I have to say, let's talk about this. So like, we all I walk around, we all do, with imposter syndrome, we all, right? I mean, like we all, we're supposed to be managers. We're supposed to be good at what we do or whatever. I mean, we're thinking to yourself, in our head saying like, I really don't even know what the fuck I'm talking about, but okay, here we go. And then you've got the person in the group that is kind of calling you out a little bit on that, or not showing you the respect, that you want. And it's like a challenge to your self-confidence, and of course, obviously, to your leadership. What do you do? What do you do if that kind of person's in your group?
Oh, so look, I mean, I think you have to nip that in the bud.
Right.
I think you have to nip that in the bud. Less about yourself. So I actually like, I try to create a culture where, on the one hand, people respect me, and on the other hand, they understand that I know that I certainly do not know all of the details of everything that's going on, because there's no way I could.
Right.
So that it's okay, like, for them to correct me and tell me that I'm wrong about things, because I want them to do that. Right. I don't understand that, but that we have to respect one another, because the problem with someone that acts disrespectful to you is that they're probably acting disrespectful to other people on the team.
Right.
They're probably, the thing that they don't respect in you, they probably also don't respect in some other people, right? Like, oh, you're not technical enough is definitely like a code word that I've heard people use for all kinds of underlying,
you're an idiot.
biases and just, silly things. And it's like, I think a lot of times what those people actually mean is they don't, you are not just like a cloned version of them, but but more senior. You
Yes.
are a different person. You have different
Yes.
skills. Like your manager, frankly, a manager has different skills than a really good senior IC. And some senior ICs don't totally get that. Like if, a manager who was just a really great senior IC is actually a pretty terrible manager.
Yeah.
I've had that manager. So I know that because, I also at some point in my life thought the best managers would all be, these extremely, extremely technical people. And what I learned at some point, having one of those extremely, extremely technical managers, was that, oh, this person is just not a very good, like I said, like I like working with this person. I think this person is super smart, but they're really bad at all that management stuff. And that's holding my career back
Sure.
because they can't get me promoted. They can't get me good projects. They it doesn't matter that we can talk tech and it's super fun. They can't help me do what I need to do. And this is actually a problem. So I think when you've got someone who is being disrespectful, I really do think it is, if they're being disrespectful to you, they're being disrespectful to others.
Yeah.
And it's not okay. And, I think you owe it to yourself and to your team to, talk to that person privately at start and say, hey, I want us to work well together, but I need you to, be thoughtful about the way we talk and interact. And frankly, if they keep it up, at some point that becomes a public, correction of I don't appreciate you talking to me this way. I don't appreciate, this is not, you just gotta be willing to, you've got to be willing to address it, right? This is where being a conflict avoidant manager can be really bad.
It can be really tough for those kinds of people. It's funny because I feel very, maybe it's my generation, how my age, but I get very military about it. I mean, I've seen so many people. This situation happens when a manager takes over an existing group, maybe from an existing manager, like the manager left or, went to another area of the company, got a new manager coming in, and maybe that existing group really liked the old manager. So now there's it's the new person in town, and I've been in that situation a couple of times myself, and it always seems to happen just organically that the people that show no respect ultimately leave.
Yes.
Sometimes it's they're asked to leave if it gets that extreme, but a lot of times it's because they're not happy in their jobs, and they find another place. I think it's important if you're a manager, you've got to have your own team. I don't want to say you want to have a bunch of yes men around you, but you need to have people that respect the fact that you're the boss.
I completely agree.
Yeah. Otherwise, stuff just doesn't get done. So speaking of stuff getting done, you were talking about, managing, multiple teams as well. One thing that I really enjoyed, you were talking about strategies on getting people to get along, move things along. You were talking about strategies for saying no, strategies for saying yes. One of the things you mentioned, which I really, really liked, is when you say to somebody, when somebody wants you to do something and you might not agree, your response, one of the suggested responses, help me say yes. Tell me a little bit about that phrase. Do you do that a lot? If I come to you and I'm like, hey, Camille, this would be really great, but you're like, this is not going to work. Would you turn around to me and say, all right, Gene, I'm willing to give you a shot, but help me say yes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I would, I probably at this point wouldn't use exactly that phrasing, but it is that's the underlying thing where it's so I think what I find is when someone comes to me and they want something and my immediate gut reaction is absolutely not, this is ridiculous. And again, I am, this is my personality, right? As you said, I'm a little bit more of conflict seeking. I'm a debater, I have that immediate gut desire to debate. Right. And so I've had to learn techniques to move away from that gut desire. And so, I think that now what I try to do is when someone comes to me with something and it sounds like a bad idea, I do try to, I try to learn more from them and give them the context of what I'm thinking about, why I think this may or may not work, so that in some sense, this is a help me say yes, right? It's how can we create a win-win out of this situation, given the state of affairs where I am what it is you need. Like, how can you shrink what you're asking for from me, or, align it with something that my organization is already doing, so that it's like an easy piggyback, so that we can get to that yes. So I do think that, like, again, I do, but I think in general, yes, like, help me say yes when someone comes to you with something and your gut says no, but this is a person that is important for you to, like a lot of management is politics. It's political. You need to make sure that your peers, your manager, your senior people around you, like, you're not just always saying no to them. You can't always say no to everyone. So you need to be seen as someone who is reasonably collaborative and willing to adjust your schedule depending on different needs of the business, different needs of, different demands, different new information. So I think help me say yes, gives you, like, helps put them in your shoes.
Yep.
Right.
It does.
Which is always important, but also, like, it's good to have techniques for not just knee jerking to no when you're faced with something that you're just like, this, this is, when you're faced with a request from someone who is important, and you shouldn't just blow off, but also your gut is just like, oh, no way.
No, that makes sense. That makes complete sense. Listen, I want to make sure that we keep track of our time here. And there are so many other questions I want to ask you about this book, but I just have a couple more. One is about hiring. Now, listen, you wrote this book a few years ago, so times have changed a little bit. And I'm going to ask you about that. It's coming up. But so just put aside whatever you wrote in the book, right? Like, right now, today, it's March of 2022. You've hired, plenty of people in your life. So when you're interviewing now, when you're looking for a manager for your business, give us some of your thoughts. What are you looking for?
Yes. So this is something that I have evolved a lot. And actually, this is probably one of the areas of the book that I would probably rewrite if I was writing it today.
Yep.
So I do have I have a set of questions and areas and competencies that I have developed with my team, because I have some really great managers working for me right now that are, some of them are better than I am at certain things. So working with those people. Yes, exactly. Right. So working with those people, we have developed kind of a set of competencies that we think are really important for managers to have. And there are things like, knowing project execution, dealing with certain kinds of employee situations, good and bad, right? Dealing with high performers, dealing with low performers, working with product managers, I think is an important skill for most managers in tech these days. And having a product mindset, right? Knowing how to collaborate with partners outside of your team to, again, when do you say no? When do you say, help me get to yes, right? How do you kind of manage conflicting goals? Depending on the level, how do you set strategy for your team, right? And then, various sort of cultural questions to make sure that, different companies have different cultures, and you want to make sure people are culturally aligned, a culture add in some ways, but not so far off that it's going to be bad for everyone involved. So I do think, though, that, like, having a structure for interviewing managers where you take the time to think about what are the management skills I want a person to be able to show that they have. And so, in the book, I think I talk about a few different things, like creating sort of almost like role-playing scenarios, and possibly even having like direct reports to interview a manager. Role-playing scenarios you could do. I think it's just a lot of work, to be honest. And so I haven't ever really managed to get that off the ground. And I actually, at this point, think that probably having direct reports to interview a manager is not a good idea for many reasons. I actually just think it's very hard to evaluate people who are a senior to you because you've never done that job. So unless you are talking about very senior levels where the direct reports are already very established professionals, like, it's just really hard to evaluate people who have done jobs that you haven't really done.
Sure.
is my, especially at more senior levels. But I very much advise decide what you're going to ask, get your group of interviewers to know which competencies they should be looking for. Ask people about specific examples from their career where things have happened. Take notes. I think one benefit of remote interviewing, if nothing else, is that, you do have the computer in front of you, and it's, I would say, like, write up the questions you're going to ask and take notes, take a running doc of notes that is as close as possible kind of to what they're saying, to at least allow you to calibrate multiple candidates against one another for your own self, right? And say, like, so, I think all interviewing sort of falls victim to this, but sometimes it's easy to be like, I really like that person, and miss that, like, but they just did not have they actually don't know anything about, hiring and maintaining a diverse group of employees, which is another thing that I think is important, right? Making sure you're at least thinking about that in the modern era is, many companies care about that, right? So, but they, some people, you ask them that question, you're like, I love this person, but, like, they just clearly have no interest in that. They don't even have I've never done it, but here are some thoughts on it answer. They just don't have an answer at all. Right. And there's, so I do think that, like, keeping that running doc of notes and making sure the competencies that you're looking for in a manager. But you've got to interview them, because I think I've made the mistake I've made occasionally in the past, is not to really kind of thoroughly vet that someone who is a, like, good people person and a good engineer also, like, actually is good at, next level management skills, for example, right? Managing an abstraction. And that can cause a lot of problems when you hire someone who's otherwise great in many ways, but maybe not the right person to be a manager of managers.
Yeah, management is it's magic in a way. It's this high level skill. And I always say, like, that's why the people that are senior managers, CEOs of companies, why they make the big bucks, is because they have that skill to be able to manage. I remember reading Jack Welch's book years ago when he was working his way up at GE, and was saying how, all he would do is he would go from location to location and look at the workforce and be like, all right, that person would be better working here. This person we should fire. This person, whatever. It's like this innate ability to read the capabilities of other people, Yep. I don't think that's something that's taught, and I guess, it's just something that you have to have sort of like a sixth sense for as well, as to whether or not you think this person's going to have the skill set to do what they got to do.
Yeah. I think that's true.
All right. Final question is, where this is all going. And when I talk about where this is all going, we were talking even before we started recording this, how, you wrote this book back in 2015, 2016. I mean, that's like a long time ago. That's like 7 long, if you figure COVID into it, that's the equivalent of 70 years, I mean, right? It's all
feels like it. Yeah.
Things have changed a lot. So if you were looking forward, what has changed about managing technical people, engineers, software developers that, going forward, you're like, all right, we need to take a different approach. What has changed in doing all that?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of the basics are still there, but I think that some things have changed. One big thing that has changed is people, and I slightly blame myself for this, but I do feel like there is a lot more focus for both managers, but also individual contributors on their career path. Okay. And on career progression. And I think you see a huge amount of desire from people to know, how can I get promoted? And this could just be, like I said, I think, one of the things I did at Rent the Runway was publishing our career ladders, and this book is written sort of to a career ladder, right? It's a little bit written to, like, the different levels of management that you might get promoted into. And I think that, managers have always been somewhat aware of this, but I think that individual contributors now are also extremely aware of this. And they expect that you're not just going to have to go into management to get promoted, which is good, because you definitely do not want to force people to go into management to be promoted, but that, it is less clear, I think, still almost everywhere, how to get promoted as an individual contributor. It's just, it's a little bit trickier. Nobody's quite cracked that nut. And I think
Yeah.
that's a big, but the expectation is much higher now than it was even when I wrote the book, that there will be some path that goes beyond senior engineer.
Right.
And so I do think that's an area that managers, really need to engage with, because if you can't figure out how to, frankly, like give authority away from your managers and to your senior individual contributors in certain places, you're going to struggle to retain the great people.
Right.
And so that is I think a big area of change. I also think that, look, I think product management as a field has become more prominent and exists at more companies, which means that engineering managers need to learn how to work with product managers, need to have a bit of a product mindset themselves.
Sure.
That is always a bit of a stressful relationship, I think, in many places.
Sure.
But I do think that that's a big change. I also think that, like, one of the things that when people ask me, like, what should managers keep learning, it's like, because look, you don't really need to keep learning like new programming languages. You can if you want. That's but how do you kind of stay technically aware? What are the things you should learn as a manager? And I always say, like, the ways of working, the major shifts in the way software engineering happens are very important to learn. So I do think, look, like, I think a lot of the work around, like, the Accelerate metrics, if you've read that book, it's a great book that talks about, like, how do high performing engineering teams, like, what are some of the metrics around, how often do they deliver and how do they think about reliability of their systems? I actually think that's a big change in software engineering over the last 5 to 10 years, that a lot of managers, like, just don't, they have not really internalized. I need to be thinking about how to keep my team actually, like, moving fast. And that some of the things that I as a manager do and need to understand kind of technically are because I'm going to need to invest in them. I'm going to need to justify the investment case for, working on technical things that will keep my team moving fast, to businesses that may just want features developed, for example. So, I think these are a few things. And, look, obviously there's this whole remote hybrid question mark situation that we are in right now. I don't have enough of a read on what that really means yet, even though it's been 2 years. Even though,
Honest answer.
I've learned some things about how to manage remotely. I've learned some things about what works and what doesn't. I think it's too early to actually say where this will all settle out. And I think people are very willing to make very strong proclamations that I'm not sure. The only thing that I feel reasonably confident in is that, like, many more companies will be much more flexible about 5 days in the office a week. I think that's certainly true, right? Which is probably good. Nobody ever, I like going to the office, so I do go in, almost all the time. But, like, that was always I like going to the office and getting out of my house. I live in a Manhattan apartment, kind of thing.
Sure.
But beyond that, and, like, are all teams going to be asynchronous, remote, global teams, or, I just don't know. And I think anybody claiming that they really know at this point is probably a little overconfident.
Camille Fournier is the author of The Manager's Path, a guide for tech leaders navigating growth and change. Her website is CamilleTalk.com. Camille, it's great. I had even more questions to ask you, but we just have to be sensitive to your time, and I appreciate you spending the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Guys, please keep subscribe to our YouTube channel and come visit us back for our twice monthly Biz Books episodes where we talk with great business authors who wrote great business books like Camille. So please join us there. You can follow me on Twitter at Gene Marks. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you again next time. Take care.